Hello, I'm Brian Hubbard.
And I'm Lynne McTaggart.
And we are What Doctors Don't Tell You, and welcome to this, our very latest podcast. And we try to give you the news you're not going to see anywhere else. We always look for the science as well that's behind it. So this week we're going to be looking at paradoxes in medicine. Why stuff doesn't seem to work, but yet it does. And we'll be looking specifically at alcohol. How much is it safe to drink? Then we'll be looking at cholesterol levels and why there's so much contradictory evidence about that. And then we're going to look at vaccines and in particular the money the manufacturers are bringing in as a result of the anti-vax campaign that's been going on. So there's plenty for you to listen to on this podcast. But Lynn, tell us a bit about the magazines we've got out at the moment on the shelves.
Well, as you know, we have a physical magazine that's now in 15 different languages, and including America and the UK, which is the one that we do. And this latest issue, which is our March edition, has a fascinating story about very simple ways that you can prevent breast cancer. Believe it or not, there is a single food that cuts breast cancer risk by nearly 2/3. And we've also looked at all kinds of natural healing in here, cures for eczema, a really interesting expose about free-from foods, and so much more. We've got stuff on pets, good idea about a detoxing alkalization diet.
Goodness me.
And many, many more things. But there's another one that's going to be coming.
Sneak preview, guys.
Sneak preview of our April issue. And this I'm really excited about because we did a special issue on depression. And in this magazine, we've got an incredible piece from a psychiatrist who basically says there is no such thing as mental illness. That all of the people coming to her with things like anxiety and depression and even schizophrenia have something going on, as she puts it, upstream in their bodies. And once she sorts that out, whether it's their thyroid problem or they need to detox or they're lacking in certain supplements, she gives them a variety of tests. All of those so-called mental issues go away. And she's seen it again and again. So we also have a real practical program you can use to find out what's causing your blues and how to sort them. And as usual, we've got a big potpourri of all kinds of other things, some natural medicines, cures for specific illnesses, cure for your pets, special recipes, healthy shopping, and so much more. So check us out.
And it's in stores all over the place across the UK and the US. But if you do have difficulties getting it, then subscribe. And you can do so via our website, which is WDDTY.com. And we'll send it to your home every month. And so to the news and our paradox special. And the first paradox article is about alcohol. I mean, the number of times we've read that alcohol is okay, that it actually could be good for us. And then we have stories that even the merest sniff will send us to an early grave. And, well, what is the truth of what's going on? Well, we seem to have come a bit closer to where the truth actually lies. And it's more to do with science than with alcohol itself. Some researchers have had a look at this and they found that depending on the research and the people who are included in the study, and in particular their ages, how young or old they are, actually determines whether alcohol is good or not for you, which is very interesting. So, for example, if someone is relatively young, is a very, very heavy drinker, alcoholic, the chances are they could be dead by the time they're 50 or 60 or so. But that will bring down the average in terms of, well, what is a healthy amount? Because it seems that nothing is healthy if people are dying from it. But if these people are excluded, and of course they are self-excluding by dying, and you actually have a whole older age group, like 60 plus people, alcohol suddenly becomes quite a good thing in moderation. So it's very interesting. They discovered that it was all really to do with the way that research is set up. And if they were to just look at older people drinking in moderation, by which we go back to the idea of 1 or 2 drinks a day maximum, alcohol has a mildly positive effect on health. But when they widen it to a much wider group of people, say including the 20-year-olds who could be very heavy drinkers, of course, then all of a sudden, alcohol is not good for you. So the takeaway message, according to the researchers who looked at this, was that once you reach the age of 65 and you're a moderate drinker, I say, that is the 1 or 2 glasses a day, it probably is okay and could have a mildly beneficial effect on your health. So, and by which time, alcohol is not going to be the killer, because if you're alive at 65, the chances are it isn't going to kill you anyway, because you were never a heavy drinker to begin with. So there you are. So that sort of maybe throws a bit of a light on this so much contradictory evidence we've had about alcohol, Lynn.
Well, and I think really what you have to understand is the risk-benefit equation with alcohol. And that's the really interesting part about it, because there are real benefits in certain alcohols, particularly red wine. But when you look at actual statistics about various things that it's supposed to do, it doesn't stack up. One of our writers, regular writers, Tony Edwards, wrote a book called The Good News About Booze. And he studied so many statistics about different areas that are supposedly a cause of alcoholism and ill health, and found that none of them were true. Even certain kinds of weight gain, was not to do with alcohol. That alcohol didn't cause weight gain. Maybe mixers did, they're high in sugar, but not alcohol. But that risk-benefit equation is particularly the case when you look at these moderate health benefits of alcohol versus the fact that alcohol is a mild poison, that the liver has to detoxify. So you've got this kind of balancing act that you've got to find where it is actually better for you than any kind of damage it's doing to your liver. Because one of the things that I found really fascinating most recently is that when the liver is compromised, and that would be from excessive drinking or whatever, it can cause your body stops being able to control its own weight. And so a lot of problems with weight gain actually have to do with liver issues. But this is all about too much drinking. So it does come back to, the science is, as you say, so contradictory because it's asking the wrong questions most of the time. And it's certainly not asking consistent questions.
And I think it's worth saying that, they say, a couple of drinks a day, but I think there is a virtue also in having rest days, isn't there? To have 4 days off with no booze at all is good for the body, helps it recover.
Absolutely.
Okay, thanks, Lynn. Okay, so to paradox story number 2. And this one concerns cholesterol. Now, the standard version of things says that high cholesterol, particularly bad cholesterol, LDL cholesterol, furs up the arteries and causes chronic heart disease and eventually heart attack and stroke. And yet, it seems that that's not entirely true. Well, we all know it's not true if you regularly listen to our podcast, but let's go with this one for a minute. In fact, high cholesterol levels protect you from cancer and respiratory disease. So how do you square that circle? Well, it goes back to the first story, and it's to do with age. And the older you are, the role and the protective effects of cholesterol change. So anyone over the age of 65, actually their LDL cholesterol levels start to protect them. And the idea that you'd give statins, therefore, to the over 65s, therefore lowering their cholesterol levels, would seem to be deleterious, harmful to their health. It's interesting. Chinese Center for Disease Control and Prevention carried out this study. Although, to be fair, their study was restricted to people aged 80 and over. They discovered that it had all sorts of protective effects. It even protected against falls, which of course is a standard problem for older people, being unstable on their feet, and it actually protected against that as well. And apparently medicine has a term for this. It's called risk factor paradox. So in other words, things that were considered to be risky earlier in life actually become protective as we get older. And other things that have a similar paradoxical effect are high blood pressure and a higher BMI, or body mass index, as we get older. And certainly by the time we reach 80, having a slightly higher BMI and slightly higher blood pressure level and a higher cholesterol level is actually protective. And now, how about that? And it's quite a major study. It was 930 people were analysed to make this discovery, and not surprisingly, the people with the higher cholesterol levels also live longer because of all these protective effects that it had. So, what do you make of that paradox?
Well, it's only a paradox if you believe the current paradigm, Brian.
Yeah, true.
I mean, it's not really a paradox because medicine has it completely wrong about fats and blood fats. And we've seen over the years, study after study, refuting the idea that high cholesterol really does lead to heart disease, and that high cholesterol is something to be lowered. I mean, and it makes complete sense when you start looking at some of the latest evidence about fats and the body. Fats are necessary. Fats don't make you fat. Sugar and processed foods make you fat. But fats are really important for your brain, in particular, as you get older. And fats are important for your muscles, too. And I found it very interesting with that Chinese research that they found that high cholesterol was protective against falls. And that would make sense because it is helpful to the muscles. It feeds the muscles. And if you see what happens with statins, one of the big side effects is muscle weakness. So what I'm really concerned about is the fact that statins just aren't going away. I mean, there's so much evidence against them. They haven't really been proven to work. They're causing so much damage. And personally, I feel that they're probably a big part of this giant increase in dementia that's going on among the aging population, dementia and Alzheimer's. Because if you're robbing the body of necessary fats, which feed the brain, no wonder the brain is starving and the brain is going to start reacting.
Well, that's a major benefit as well of LDL cholesterol is its important protective effect on the brain. The Chinese didn't mention that at all, but of course, previous studies that we've explored show exactly that. And, there is an argument, there's a correlation between statin intake and the rise of dementia. If the people are being restricted of the fats they need for their brain health, well, it follows, doesn't it, that older people could develop dementia.
Absolutely. So this whole idea of cholesterol is a terrible red herring. It's spawned all kinds of medicine and theories that are doing us nothing but harm. So one of the keys to old age and healthy old age is making sure you get the right fats. And they are not polyunsaturated fats like seed oils, like sunflower seeds, etc. They are subjected to too much heat and processing, and they become very reactive and oxidative. So they're not good for you. But you do need omega-6s in the form of things like sunflower seeds and pumpkin seeds. But you need to make sure that you get enough omega-3 fatty acids. You need to make sure that you have good fats, uncooked extra virgin olive oil, coconut oil, and all of those animal fats that we always eschewed, goose fat, beef fat, all of those fats, if you eat meat, are good for you.
Well, any of you who've not been living in a cave of late may have noticed there's been a plethora of stories promoting the use of vaccines, clamping down on anti-vaxxers, as they're known, really looking for more control over what is posted on social media that may be of an anti-vax sort of leaning. And the national, international press has followed suit with many, many op-ed pieces about how these vaccine deniers are threatening mankind and all the rest of it. And there are several stories running along there, which we'll come back to in future podcasts, but enough to say this time round that there is a winner, and it's not children, it's the vaccine manufacturers. There's a market research group, several have actually looked at this. One of them, called HTF, reckon that there will be a massive hike in MMR vaccine revenues by 2025. And Research and Markets, another market research group, has actually put some figures on it and reckoned that vaccine revenues will rise to $57.5 billion by 2025, which is up from $33.7 billion last year. So that's a pretty impressive increase all of a sudden. And they say that a lot of it is to do with government initiatives to make sure that children are getting vaccinated. And of course, in the other side of that same coin is censoring anti-vax voices and making sure they're not going to get heard, so that more and more people do get their children vaccinated. And but as I say, there is certainly one big winner, and that is the vaccine manufacturer themselves. So I'm sure you have a lot to say about this, Lynn.
Well, this is outrageous on a number of fronts, Brian. And number one is the collusion of the media with the pharmaceutical industry on this issue. I am shocked as a journalist to see ordinarily responsible media outposts like the New York Times write these pro-vaccine editorials that are not based in fact. If they understood that, if they had done the slightest bit of research, they would not make statements like, vaccines are safe and effective. Vaccines are not completely safe. Manufacturers say this. They have to put a whole list of side effects. They have to put aside an enormous amount of money to fund VAERS, which is the Vaccine Adverse Event Reporting System in America, that has paid out millions in children who have been damaged by vaccines. That is tacit acknowledgement that there is no such thing as a completely safe vaccine. So there is, number one, the media collusion. When I was a journalist, when I was reporting as a young reporter, we were taught that you needed to be objective. You needed to provide both sides of the story with general information like that. And to not put in anything about the dangers of vaccines is irresponsible journalism, number one. Number two is the issue of censorship. We've got to a point where no voice challenging vaccines is allowed to be heard anymore. That that Google is monitoring this, Facebook is monitoring this. This is really shocking because it's tacit agreement that vaccines are completely safe and effective, so that we can't even ask the question anymore in anything other than magazines like ours is outrageous. Then the other thing is the ignorance and the lack of logic in this idea that we have to have herd immunity at all costs, because that is going to stop these outbreaks of measles, et cetera, et cetera. That is a complete fallacy. Number one, consistently, these outbreaks occur among vaccinated children in the main. That's number one. Number two, if vaccines worked so well, then why would the people who got vaccinated, had their children vaccinated, have to worry? because they'd be protected. And the other people who had chosen to carry out their own right to make a determination about their own child, that would be their decision to expose them to the illnesses or not. That's not the state's decision, that's their decision. These are not, in the main, these are not diseases that kill well-nourished children, in the main. And many of the ones that did have totally disappeared, and not because of vaccines. So finally, the real issue here is coercion. The issue is really about the government coercing and the authorities coercing people to give their children things that they cannot guarantee is safe. And what we used to do in a lot of our information about vaccines is have a little vaccine authorization form that you would give to your doctor and say, I, Dr. So-and-so, I agree and acknowledge that this vaccine is totally safe, and if it is not, it is my responsibility. There is no doctor who will sign that, because they know that vaccines cannot guarantee that vaccines don't carry some risk and aren't always effective.
Okay, MS, multiple sclerosis, terrible disease, debilitating, and autoimmune, but no one really knows, well, what kickstarts it, what causes it. They just know it's something to do with the immune system. And thereafter we draw a blank. But there's been some research lately by the Brigham and Women's Hospital group, and quite interestingly, they think that yes, it is a reaction, but it actually starts as an allergic reaction, which is causing inflammation in the gut, which then triggers MS symptoms. So they've had a bit of a look at this, which I think is very interesting indeed. Because I do know already that a typical MS sufferer, can suffer a relapse soon after a certain food they eat, that they do react to that. But they just thought, well, that's just a co-carrying symptom of the problem. But they've actually gone further and think, well, no, actually it could be triggering the problem in the first place. It was the genesis of the problem in the first place. They had a look at over nearly 1,400 MS sufferers. They discovered that only those who had a food allergy suffered severe and frequent relapses. So they're saying that it seems to be MS, therefore, could be an inflammatory response to food. And so I think that's quite an interesting insight. I mean, I don't know whether that means, well, therefore can we treat MS? It certainly opens a new door of therapy, which I think is very, very interesting, to see whether, therefore, removing the food or trying to restore the gut to its good bacteria environment, or what could actually reverse the condition. They haven't actually gone that far, but as I say, it does seem to open the way for new research, new therapies anyway. So what do you think then? I mean, it's very interesting. It seems to be a common factor, doesn't it, with so many conditions. Some reaction, some food, some gut, compromised gut seems to be at the heart of so many problems.
Absolutely. I think that is where most things start. Now, here's one possibility, too, that maybe it isn't the allergic food, that the allergy started it, but because there was a compromised gut, the allergy aggravated it or caused it to happen because of several things. Now, one of the things that the late Patrick Kingsley, who cured many patients of multiple sclerosis, found was that in so many instances, patients had high mercury levels from amalgam in their teeth, in their fillings. And here's something that this causes. We know from that amalgam fillings cause certain resistant bacteria in the gut. So it sets up a dysbiosis, a problem in the gut. And it also causes leaky gut. So that means that food molecules that ordinarily are stopped by that two-way protective fence we've got in our gut lining are allowed through. And these large food molecules can cause all kinds of problems in the brain and neurologically, which is what happens with MS. So it could be the mercury causes the gut problems, which causes the food allergies. But the point is that it really is all happening in the gut and happening with toxicity in the gut in some way. And so if we clear that up, as he did, many of those symptoms go away.
And he was actually reversing the condition, wasn't he?
In thousands of patients, absolutely.
Which is extraordinary. And of course, for his labours, he was closed down.
Well, nearly closed down. They were thinking about closing him down, but and he got pestered by the medical authorities instead of asked, how come he's curing cancer and how come he's curing MS? One other final thing that he found that's really important to know about is B12. That is a really important factor that is missing in a lot of patients, not high enough B12 levels in patients with MS.
Well, if you have MS or you know someone who does, do pass on that information because that really could be the key. Let's hope so anyway. Thanks, Lynn.
Thank you.
So now to quite a fascinating subject. I know it's quite close to your heart, Lynn, and to the other work that you do, and that's placebo. You know, I mean, placebos have been run against drugs for many, many years, invariably found to be just as effective. They've even done it with surgical interventions, you name it. People are feeling better whether they've had the placebo or not, but the placebo is just as effective.
Yeah.
And quite an extraordinary thing, really, isn't it? And I know it's done as a sort of a medical trial to sort of set it against the actual chemical agent to say, well, does the chemical agent actually work? But they're missing the point, which is the placebo is working. And that, to me, is a far more interesting insight than the fact that it's tested against a drug. I mean, it seems that the human mind, however you describe that, has this healing capacity, which is quite extraordinary. But this new study just came out, which showed it doesn't even have to be anything physical, like a drug or a sugar pill, as a placebo would be, to have an effect. And they've done it with psychological placebos, as they call it. And in this particular test from the University of Basel, they showed 420 people a green screen, half of whom were told this is relaxing, this is calming, this will have a positive effect on your emotions. And the rest, they just showed the green screen without saying anything at all about it. And not surprisingly, there you are. The people who were told it had a calming effect, that it was good for them, and all the rest of it, indeed recorded feeling much calmer afterwards. They were much more in control of their emotions or anger, and just because they were told that the green would have that effect on them.
Yeah. Amazing.
So what do you think, Lynn, about the use of placebo generally? We had a chap we knew, we featured him in our magazine a few months back, did a thing called the X pill. And the X pill contains absolutely nothing.
Rice bran.
Yeah. And he told people this, and they were nonetheless having enormous transformative things happening to them in their lives. And so you think, well, I mean, and the interesting question is the human mind, isn't it?
Yeah.
And how does it heal? How does it work? Where is the human mind? Does it extend beyond the body? This is total Lynne McTaggart filled Power of 8 territory. So Lynn, tell us more.
Well, I am fascinated by the power of the mind in healing. And I've certainly seen it with my Power of 8 groups where we have a small group of 8, send an intention to somebody, a healing intention to somebody, member of the group with a health challenge. And we get a huge number of instant healings, in 10 minutes. So that suggests something about the human capacity for healing. And as you say, the mind's ability to heal. What we have to understand about health is it's a complex interweaving of our physical body, our mental body, our emotional body, our spiritual body, and all of those things combined to create health or illness. And what I find oftentimes I ask people, particularly people with cancer, and they'll say, well, what should I do? And I say, what do you believe is going to work? Because that's going to be the thing that heals them. And as you say, I mean, doctors, even when doctors tell patients this is a placebo, if they follow doctor's orders, he says, but I want you to take it twice a day, they will take it and they get better. And that really tells you all you need to know about the power of somebody's belief that this is going to help them because their doctor told them to take it. They believe it's going to help them. Because a group of strangers is sending intention to you and caring about you enough to send healing thoughts to you, that's enough to cure you. And so really it all starts and ends in the human mind, our healing. And so our takeaway from that on our health side is what's going to heal you is what you believe is going to work.
Thanks, Lynne. Well, drugs are dangerous. We all know that. They have side effects. We have adverse reactions. But guess what? They're even more dangerous than we thought. Apparently, fully 35% of adverse reactions are not getting recorded in medical trials. Why? Because they never set up the trial in the first place to record them. And so the people had a look at this. They said, well, yeah, 35% of research studies looking at drugs are not recording side effects. 8% of those weren't even set up in the first place to capture side effects. And the further 27% only did so partially. I mean, the University of York researchers are rather staggered by this as to why they never looked for it in the first place. But of course, it goes back to good old money, doesn't it? I mean, if most medical trials are being carried out on the behest of the drug company and researching the drug that they want researching, well, they don't really want people to start capturing the information that it's not very good for you, that it can have serious adverse reactions. So, not surprisingly, the trials are not set up in the first place to capture that. So, and the truth is, we just don't know how dangerous drugs are because they're saying, well, 35% aren't getting captured in medical trials, but how many are not being recorded by doctors in the first place? I mean, there was one study years ago, a French study, and they reckoned only 1 in 20,000 adverse reactions or side effects were ever being recorded by the doctor. Usually because he's too busy, it means more paperwork and who needs it, or it could be a side effect that hasn't been recorded before, and therefore they look down the list and say, well, it can't be the drug because it's not been recorded, so it's not the drug. And yet, of course, it was, and it never does get recorded. But, so it's extraordinary, isn't it, Lynne?
Well, these studies essentially are dirty. The British Medical Association identified that 3/4 of medical studies, as we've talked about before on this podcast, are massaged by PR firms. And that's the British Medical Association saying this. Same thing, New England Journal of Medicine, their editors said the same. So we know that these studies are being massaged, but now we're seeing that they're not even set up to ask the question. And what outrages me the most about this story is that the regulatory authorities are allowing these drugs through. When they're not even asking questions about side effects, that no drug regulator says, hey, what about the side effects? And then finally, by the time it gets to the doctor, doctors aren't really taught that drugs have side effects. I mean, we had somebody in our office recently whose wife had just had a baby, got jaundice. And he and his wife had looked online and realized, looking at side effects of the drug they had given her for high blood pressure post-birth caused liver issues. And they kept bringing this up to the doctor in hospital, and everybody said, no, 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 no. Because they aren't schooled to say that drugs could ever cause a problem. So we've got it right down the line, but it really is the regulatory agencies' Brian. They really need a slap for this one.
And clinical trials, they're set up to first and foremost look at the safety of the drug even before its effectiveness. And if they're not even setting up the trial to capture that data, it's failing in its fundamental purpose.
Shame on you, Food and Drug Administration. Absolutely.
Well, on which slightly unhappy note, we'll have to call it a day there. It's slightly gone over this one. It's a veritable smorgasbord of interesting health information this week. I'm sure you'll agree. So I hope you don't mind us running over a little bit. But I'll say adieu till next time. My name's Brian Hubbard. Thanks for watching or for listening.
And Lynne McTaggart. And don't forget to check out our magazine in all good stores, supermarkets, and newsagents. Thank you.